Hello and welcome back to a special Digital Foundry developer interview, and this one is an unexpected and special occasion because we're talking to the developers behind a new game that's just been revealed called Kingmakers. And this is from the guys that created Road Redemption, which I featured in my Road Rash retrospective not so long ago, so also check that out. But I'm joined today by four of these guys. Why don't you introduce yourselves and your studio?
I'm Ian Fish. Our studio is now called Redemption Road Game, and I'm one of the main coders of the project, co-founder of the studio.
Yeah, I'm also a co-founder. I'm Paul Fish, and I'm a programmer too. Everybody in this interview is actually a programmer.
Yeah. And I'm Daniel Blaze. I'm another co-founder and, like I said, coder. We also do a lot of the project, everything related to the project. So,
my name's Trace. I'm the only non-co-founder here. I am a software engineer at Redemption Road Games.
All right, so we have 3 founders, 4 programmers. I like it. That's good stuff. Yep. So yeah, this game kind of came out of nowhere. You guys just kind of showed up and be like, dude, check out this trailer of thing we're working on. And I was like, okay, what is this? Open it up. Looks like it's just a regular strategy game. And then this happens. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? This looks rad. And so I thought, you know what? I want to reach out and chat with you guys about this. And we're going to talk a little bit about the technology, about the ideas behind the game, all this kind of stuff. But I actually kind of want to start on the tech side, seeing this is DF. And first of all, I don't know anything about the underlying tech yet. This is the first time we've spoken about this. So why don't you fill me in? What is the basis for this game? Are you using an engine like Unity, or is this all from the ground up? Like, how's this put together?
We're using the Unreal Engine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, but so there are a few different aspects of the tech that kind of make it special. The goal of this game was really to push this generation forward. This is not something that can run on last gen. This is a next gen game. So one of the aspects is the rendering, and I can talk most about that. So, in a medieval battle, historically, you would have thousands and thousands of soldiers. And that's not something you can do with traditional skeletal animation, especially if you want the kind of fidelity you get from like a third-person, first-person shooter. So what's happening is you're actually looking at vertex animation that is being computed on the GPU. So basically what happens is every frame of these animations of these soldiers have is written to a line of pixels in an offset texture, and that actually tells you where each vertex should be. And then there's another texture that's all the normal values for all of the different verts.
Yeah, essentially like the shaders run that animation most of the time, or for most of the soldiers. That's how we have thousands of soldiers
So
on
instead
screen.
of the skeletal animation being calculated on the CPU, it's all vertex animation on the GPU. But it's not your typical vertex animation shader, which maybe has a transition between 1 or 2 animations. It is a full-fledged blend space. So you have 8-way walks that blends into 3-way runs that can blend into a fight and an attack. So it's a really, really complex shader with a bunch of custom HLSL code. And then you might notice from the trailer, some guys are wearing different types of helmets, some guys have different weapons, different shields. So those are also separate meshes that have their own vertex animation shader to keep them, in position.
Yeah, and those are also powered partially through Niagara, like the helmets and shields.
So every soldier you see, every helmet, every shield, every weapon, those are all individual Niagara particles, and we're communicating via various data interfaces with Niagara. This is all in C++, obviously, to basically every single frame, what's the position and rotation of each one of these particles. We're also piping in, for instance, an integer which defines the color, so you can have 5 teams of soldiers and thousands of different variations, all within a very small amount of texture memory for the offset textures. And then once the player starts to interact with these guys, they do become skeletal, and that way we can have another 1,000 animations.
It does like a seamless switch over. You can't even tell.
That's what I was going to ask about, right? Because I noticed, like, we've seen big crowd scenes before, but the amount of fidelity in the individual animations, the interactions with the player, all that stuff is kind of the next level that I've seen. Plus, it also seems like when you actually attack them, it becomes, they sort of take on ragdoll physics properties. So as you plow through a crowd of guys in the truck, they all react accordingly. And I feel like this is the main differentiating factor with your crowd system, and it does look really freaking good.
Yeah, we spent about 4 years on the tech, and that's how you see like
Yeah.
the seamless vertex switched
Yeah.
skeletal.
Yeah, so there's a lot of weird little snags with the Unreal Engine. For instance, you would think, okay, so they're going to be vertex animated the whole time. They're going to do their complicated blend space, but then as soon as you shoot them, you could make them skeletal. But it actually doesn't work that way because Unreal needs a few frames to get the skeletal guy in position. So what actually happens is we make them skeletal as the player hovers his crosshair over them, or in the case of the car, once the car is within a few meters of them. And so we're constantly making these guys skeletal under the hood, and it's all seamless. You can't even tell.
Yeah, and all the code is like very custom to like seamlessly switch these out. Like we've written our own animator entirely that drives all the animation.
Yeah, so there's for every animation you see that's vertex based, there's also a skeletal version of that running under the hood. On those select soldiers, we have a pool of 20 guys that we swap in and out, and the player doesn't have any idea.
Yeah, and that's how we can keep the performance so good, so we can run even on lower end systems.
Yeah, but if you compare this to something like Ultimate Epic Battle Simulator, for instance, there are a few things different. One is the skeletal switching, but another is the fact that even the vertex animation is so much more advanced than you'll see in some of these other games, where you have this whole 8-way walk blend space happening in vertex, which is not something we've seen before.
Right, absolutely. I'm curious then, how many of these guys roughly can you get on screen at once?
Currently, we are holding it to 4,000 at once.
Oh, geez, only 4,000.
Yeah, but technically we could probably go higher if we wanted to. Like,
I mean, we definitely can go higher at the cost of like trade-off of performance, but we're still working on that and optimizations for it.
I'm curious then, how much of the render budget is this eating up per frame, would you say, roughly?
Well, a good bit. Certainly a lot. Processing such a complicated shader is not easy, and it shows up. So we forgo various things. We're not using Lumen, obviously. We're not using screen space global illumination. We're not using nanite, obviously, as well. So we really profile constantly. You're up in the CPU profile or up in Unreal Insights to make sure. But yeah, it's costly.
And well, because they're all vertex animated and they're all actually like the same mesh, that's why it's not that costly, because it's highly parallel. Like that's how we can do 4,000.
Yeah, that definitely saves on draw calls. But I mean, the main reason for using a vertex shader is not having to do the CPU skeletal computations.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that I'm curious about. How does the crowd work in terms of AI? Is it like a swarm-based system, or like how does this actually function in terms of reacting to the player?
Well, I'm gonna let Trace talk about this, but there's one thing about the AI that I want to say is, if you look at these other games like Total War, they use pretty simple AI for the individual soldiers. They use maybe like a flow field type thing that works great in it works great in like 2 dimensions. But we're like, no, we want to make this game the same fidelity as you expect in any first-person or third-person shooter. We want to have castles that are intricate, that are 4 stories tall, that have 100 rooms. And we want the AI to be able to pathfind through these 3-dimensional spaces. So no compromises here. We want the real thing.
Yeah. So it's like we have an AI that's heavily optimized, heavily multi-threaded.
Oh yeah.
That can run with like extreme detail and like as good as enemies that interact with the player.
Yeah. So you can explain how that works.
Yeah. So they actually brought me on because I was working on making my own nav mesh and pathfinding stuff in Unreal Engine. And so a lot of what I've done is basically made it so that we can make 4,000 guys all use nav mesh pathfinding at the same time, which has not been easy. The amount of Unreal code we're actually running through at this point is very small compared to our own stuff. Though of course we still use the Unreal nav mesh. We have all custom pathfinding. We have our own paths. We have our own, pathfinding algorithms that make it so that we can like run our pathfinding on a completely separate thread, and then make sure that it all gets handed out to the soldiers in a reasonable amount of time.
We have our own collision solver for
We
things
do.
like horses.
Yeah, we also we have
shapes of horses.
Yeah, the soldiers.
The cavalry.
The soldiers have
About cavalry, which is even more complex, but those are also all vertex.
Yeah, on the same thread where we're running our pathfinding, we're also doing multiple clustering algorithms. So I have a statistics background, so I really enjoy this sort of stuff. We have multiple clustering algorithms that allow the soldiers to like target each other in a really smart way. Especially the horses, they like to target large masses of soldiers as they charge through them. So that was really important for that effect. Yeah,
because like unlike a game like Total War, where you're constantly looking overhead and you can micro your guys and like order them around, like that's not happening in our game. So our AI has to be a lot smarter. Like the cavalry has to run autonomously, intelligently to like charge the right. Like you can redirect them, but they charge legions far more intelligently than your normal RTS.
Right. That's cool. So with all the stuff with the nav mesh, the collision stuff, and based on what I've seen in the trailer, then it seems like there are actually intricate environments as this castle. How does this function gameplay wise, and like in terms of like how does the enemy and the player work together within these structures? Is there going to be missions that actually takes you through buildings and interior spaces, and the same crowd system is able to navigate that?
Oh yeah, easily. So yeah, we're trying to do this. The plot of the game is that you are trying to take over the United Kingdom in the 15th century. So it involves you kind of moving from.
You say unite, remember, Ian? You're not taking it over. You're helping unite it against
you're conquering the United Kingdom. So you can choose whether you want to play as England, Wales, or Scotland, and then kind of take over. So that involves building up castles and then invading other people's castles in this kind of very sandboxy kind of way. So you get placed into a map, and there'll be various enemy forts, and there'll be a giant enemy castle a lot of the time, and the whole thing will be interactable. You'll go and you'll invade these castles, and you'll defend your own, and they navigate through it with the same fidelity of pathfinding you'd expect from a first-person shooter.
Interesting. So to rewind then, and we talked about this before we started the interview, and this is essentially the latest attempt at the distraction genre, as it was called, from the late 90s. The idea here is you're marrying action with strategy. So there is RTS elements here. You're taking over the map like an RTS, but there's a clear premium placed on individual actions and sort of the granularity of that, which I would say is something that was generally missing from those types of games. And I'm curious, I'd like to hear now about your actual core mechanics for the player, like what you're doing in terms of the way they interact with the enemies, what the individual battles are like from that perspective, and generally, like, what does unit control look like? Like, how do you interact with this game?
Yeah.
So like the battles are huge, right? And you're a player in them, but you can also go up and order your units around. And yeah, that's pretty much. I don't know if you're adding.
Yeah. So we wanted, we focused first on the third-person shooter. We wanted to make it as visceral and as exciting as the best games in the category. So like, we took a lot of inspiration from Vermintide, Darktide.
We haven't mentioned. Yeah, the game is fully multiplayer co-op with
that's
all these
another
soldiers.
aspect that I can talk about. And we took inspiration from The Last of Us 2 when it came to the enemy hit reactions. I'd love to be on that level. That is like the gold standard. It's just amazing. Every single body part reacts differently.
Yeah.
So we really, really wanted to make sure you're having fun when you're shooting. So the idea is, if you went back in time to the 15th century, you would be this really, really powerful force on the battlefield with your AK-47, M16. But you'd have this army that is at your command. So you'll take a look at the battlefield. You'll quickly send your archers over here, your pikemen over there, and then you'll say, hey, you know what, my macemen over in this place, they're being kind of pinned down. by the enemy spearmen and cavalry. So I'm going to go over there with my rocket launcher and my M16. I'm going to jump in the back of my motorbike, drive on over there, and just take charge.
Yeah, and actually, you'd be surprised. Like, even though you have all these modern weapons, when like 100 horses are bearing down on you, it's still pretty hard to fight them with your assault rifle and your weapon.
So yeah, it's a balance of player power versus also army power. We're trying to make sure that you still it still plays a part. There's strengths and there's weaknesses of the armies. Or maybe Ian was just talking about Macemen over here. You realize, oh, it's Macemen level 1, or we're changing the levels how they work, but there's a certain amount of strength of different army compositions that we're trying to keep in there as well to give some more skill and challenge in addition to the player power. Because like Paul said, you can be overwhelmed pretty quickly, but you also want to control command properly.
This is ultimately not a game that you're just spend all your time in top-down view. It's more like you go to top-down view to issue orders, and then you're so important on the battlefield that you need to go out there. And like there are even like custom enemies specifically catered to the third person experience that like target you and have big shields, and like archers that take cover and are trying to snipe you specifically.
Yeah, we're spending a lot of time to make sure that the AI is interesting, intelligent, and engaging. That's a huge part of our combat.
Yeah, for sure.
Indeed, and beyond just the hit reactions and stuff, I'm looking at the trailer again. One of the things I'm noticing is things like breakable shields. Like he takes a shotgun and you actually see the shield sort of splinter. Like, how are you handling such granular reactions on such a big scale?
That guy's skeletal.
Oh,
yeah. So basically, that guy, once the player kind of hovers his cursor over him, he becomes skeletal.
Yeah, it goes skeletal.
Right. So then when you shoot him, it sends some ray casts and it sees, okay, it hit the shield. What's the physics tag on the shield? Okay, it's made of wood. So we the piece you actually see broken off is actually part of the shader itself. So it's just an opacity mask shader, and it has a bunch of different
pieces,
parts that can break off, and so we just set the material instance and we say, okay, part this thing is this broken part. Piece 1 of 6 is broken.
Yeah.
Right.
And the shields are actually like really important because depending on what gun you're using, it can maybe pierce through the shield.
Right.
If you have like a Desert Eagle, but if you have a little submachine gun, like it'll shatter the shield, but it won't go through.
Yeah, everything has a penetration strength. So like the shield and the soldiers themselves and your gun, so you can upgrade your penetration on your assault rifle, and then you can shoot through 3 people, for example.
So I feel like that's the overarching message here about the core of the game, is that it's about doing this large scale crowd system, but with granularity that really hasn't been done before. Because we've seen plenty of games with large crowds. That's nothing new. Even on the PS2 I covered last year, there was a game called Ikusagami.
I watched that.
That had 65,000 troops on screen, but they're mostly sprites, and it's a trick, right? And there's still trickery here with the vertex animation stuff, but the granularity, the level of detail and quality of the animation work is truly next level stuff. So when I see this, I'm thinking, all right, you're targeting current generation machines. Like you got to get this running on the consoles.
Yeah.
What are you looking at in terms of performance profile there?
Well, so we have a number of systems here that are meant to mimic like a PS5, Xbox Series S, Xbox Series X. And so we're always running it on those to make sure that it's going to still function.
The game can actually gracefully scale to even a really low-end machine because ultimately the main performance drag is how many vertices each soldier has.
Yeah,
so you can load them down on like a weaker machine.
Yeah, it's really weird because it's like, you think about modern, graphics constraints. It's all about like your fragment shader. It's all about a pixel shader. Not vertex. Vertex shader? Who's limited by vertex?
Yeah.
Right. It's like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're back. Yeah, we're back in like PlayStation 2 times where the vert count actually matters.
So all our models are pretty much handmade and very optimized for vert count specifically.
And at a distance anyway, it's, you can't usually tell those things. And I guess as you get closer, you bring in the high quality LODs, switch to skeletal, and then you got all that granularity up close. That's super clever. So,
and it's not a console,
I don't know if
but it does run on the Steam Deck too.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
This runs on the Steam Deck? Wow. Okay.
We didn't think to do this, but
we hadn't tested it, but
they did the play test, and one of the people
test,
on Steam Deck, and they're like, yeah, it works fine. We're like, what?
That's pretty great. So does that? I don't know if it's been decided yet. Are you going to aim for 60 frames per second on the consoles?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Wow. Okay.
We might do the performance mode.
And quality mode thing.
But we might just have the performance mode. Like I don't know if there's an option to play at 60. That's where people should play. I know it's a controversial opinion, but
oh yeah. No, I agree. That would be great. That's cool. Okay. So what? I guess the question. What about the actual like map layout design? Because one of the things about Road Redemption is that it was sort of procedural all the way through. Is this procedural, or are you actually doing like designed levels, or is it a mix of both?
It's a mix of both.
Yeah. Even Road Redemption itself was a mix of both. Like it was procedural, but there were also elements that were like handcrafted. Because that's the best way to do that kind of thing.
I agree. That's kind of like Returnal, for instance, was another example of that, where it's procedural, but all the chunks are built out very carefully. So
yeah, I really like that game.
Yeah, we want to make sure that we have a good play space for the, like I said, the third-person action part of it. Like it needs to be, having cover points, having interesting parts of the level to go into and fight around is definitely very important. And some of that can be done procedurally, but some of that you want to do a little bit more.
And a lot of the time, you're kind of building the environment you play in. Like you are in charge of setting up.
Structures.
And walls and all that. Like you control the choke points to try to make it so you can hold against an overwhelming force.
Yeah, so you build like an armory, and it's like this 3-story structure that now becomes a play space when the enemies invade.
Okay, and what about single player? Is there like a whole campaign?
Yeah.
So it feels like there's a story here with ridiculousness.
Single player and co-op are both campaign. Like it's the same campaign that people can join you.
Right. So it's a big like we said, the idea is you go back in time, 15th century. It's this kind of tumultuous period. Right before the 100 Years' War. Well, I shouldn't say before. I should say in the middle of the 100 Years' War between England and France. So, in the 14th century, you have the Black Death, and that kind of interrupts the 100 Years' War. And then Henry V kind of restarts it. He wants to take over. He wants to get their territory back from France that they feel like they have a right to, and he actually wants to claim the throne of France from Charles VI. There's a Shakespeare play called Henry V. It's incredibly inaccurate. In the play, it's like, this guy insulted me. I'm going to go take over France. No, that's not how it was. They wanted France. As soon as he was born, he's like, I'm taking over France. Yeah. So you have Henry V, wanting to take over France, but also wanting to keep the peace in the United Kingdom. So you have in Wales, you have this guy Owain Glyndwr, and he's the first person to try to gain independence for Wales in 200 years. So in real life, he actually did. He actually succeeded and had this really, really powerful rebellion that was eventually defeated by Henry V. And then in Scotland, you had King James I. Now, this isn't James Stewart, the famous King James I who succeeded Queen Elizabeth. This was James I that nobody's ever heard of. You can barely find anything about him. And basically what happened to him was he was on his way to France to escape his uncle in Scotland, where he was kidnapped by pirates, who was then sold to Henry V, and was basically kept as a hostage in England for 18 years, kind of like a Theon Greyjoy from Game of Thrones. So in the midst of all this, you land from the future and shake everything up. So if you join Scotland, that propels James to escape captivity from the Tower of London and join you. And then as Scotland, you kind of gradually take over, kind of pick up where Robert the Bruce left off.
Yeah, and the idea is that you are going back in time and changing history, and there are multiple endings that create different types of futures, because you're coming from a dystopia future and trying to fix things, and you can have all types of different endings of ways you transformed reality. And you kind of see that in the trailer when he time warps back to the future.
At the end, yeah. Ah, so that's what that's hinting at with the giant flying cat.
Yeah,
thing.
That's Cat World, yep.
Yeah, that's pretty good. It's pretty good. Well, I'm glad to know that historical accuracy is high on the list here. It seems like this is a great way to relive history. So I guess another thing I am curious about though is anything with environmental systems, like what are you doing for foliage? Is there interactions on that? Are things like trees and whatnot? Is there destructibles in the environment? What about the sky system? Stuff like this.
Yeah, so the trees, they are destructible. So you can throw a grenade and you have a system that basically, interacts with the Unreal Foliage System to knock down a tree. We're working on, guys that can come and chop them down as well. In terms of, day-night cycles, we're also working on that. And, got to keep things kind of simple in the skybox, because, every bit of GPU performance counts. And, same for like the shaders when it comes to like, you'll get into a map and it'll be autumn environment or winter environment. And a lot of games will kind of have a single shader for a tree, for instance, and you set some material parameters to make it winter, make it autumn. And, if you actually open up those shaders, you have all this branching, this dynamic branching, but that doesn't work. In Unreal, dynamic branching doesn't actually save you any GPU performance. It's not quite obvious, but if you look at the HLSL code that it compiles into, it just does everything. So you have to put in static switches, basically, that would compile into different shader permutations. So there's not going to be, for instance, a tree that starts out with leaves and then becomes autumnal and then becomes winter. Like that'll be a separate map.
Yeah, but then there will be like a separate winter map.
Yeah.
And like autumn.
I did that. I think nobody's expecting that anyway. It's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty interesting then.
But yeah, pretty much everything in the game is custom, from the multiplayer to the terrain stuff to the guys. Like, we've had to do so much because we're trying to push so many boundaries that it's just all custom code.
The multiplayer code itself is an insane thing, because if you think about a game like Total War or StarCraft, where you have hundreds of units or thousands, that's based usually on this deterministic system where everything's in lockstep and you're just sending inputs.
Yeah, but that doesn't work so well when you're in first person or third person, because when you start shooting, that's like not in the lockstep. So we have a custom system that does it, and basically how it works is that all like the soldiers closer to you are receiving updates more often, which is pretty common, and the ones further away from you are receiving updates less often. But it's 4,000 soldiers, so the way it works is that they're slightly adjusted to the past. Like if you're a client, they might be running 250 milliseconds in the past. Right. But as soon as you go and engage a soldier, like you shoot a soldier, the client tells the server that it's taking control over these soldiers and have them rush you. So the ones you interact with are happening in real time, and it's just handed off to the client to manage those.
So how many players can interact at once in this? Is it 2?
Right now it's 4 players. 4. But that's mostly limited because we want the game to be player hosted. We want players to be able to run listen servers.
That's good.
In the future we might jump onto dedicated servers like we did with Road Redemption, but we want this game to be something that you can play forever.
Yeah, you're not depending on us to run the
20
servers.
years if our servers shut off.
Sure. No, that's great. I appreciate that future look. So let's say you have 4 players kind of all within somewhat close proximity, but not exact, but close enough where they all start shooting at different groups of crowds. It starts to feel like that would be pretty messy to deal with in terms of managing what you're sending, right? Because
it is, but it's not exactly, because it's server authoritative what the soldiers are doing. It's only when soldiers pull to target a client, then they will come and then the client will take control of them. But it really works pretty well because the AI is set up with specific players that it's targeting. So when the AI decides I want to target this guy, it can tell the client, or the client can tell the server, and it can hand them off. And you can't tell it's
where you see those sort of granular interactions with your other players. If they're shooting a guy that's however many meters away from the player, they're engaging them in close combat. Will you actually see that stuff playing out smoothly?
Yeah. We
interesting. That's cool.
Because these are kind of rare events. Obviously not rare, but not every single millisecond.
Right, sure, but they will happen.
Yeah. So basically, what happens is, because it's a rare event, we can send an RPC for something like that anytime you shoot. And obviously, if you're experiencing it, you're going to get a little bit more detail of what's happening. Like you'll see the individual body part reaction, but we'll probably send some of this stuff. And we do send some of this stuff as like pretty simple, like unsigned int 8s of the different body.
Yeah.
So they'll see a simplified version of the shot, but they don't care. They're focusing on the guys they're shooting.
Yeah, but it doesn't look like crazy. Like it does work well.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned the lighting in this game was fully real time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it kind of has to be because everywhere you go, there's like so many soldiers casting shadows.
Yeah,
like
this is true.
Just baked it would be bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Well, a mix of the two, but yeah.
Right. Well, the main reason we're not baking is like number one, it's a giant outdoor environment, so light map would just be.
Yeah, it would be a huge light map, wouldn't it? Yeah.
But also like when you place the individual structures, there's not really a way for Unreal to kind of include a mini light map into a blueprint, into a prefab.
No, that's
object.
true. That's true.
So that kind of makes it difficult. So like theoretically, we could have light maps baked into the buildings that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Thinking about it with the dynamic nature of building structures as an RTS, that doesn't make any sense, does it? So.
Yeah. It also really slows down development to
Yeah.
bake because every time you move something, and now you have to rebake, and it's just.
That's cool then,
Yeah.
especially with these outdoor environments. I guess it makes sense that it should. You don't have a lot of challenging indirect lighting scenarios outside of maybe some of the castle areas, so it should look pretty good, and it does look good in the trailer.
Yeah. It's we only have one shadow casting light source.
Yeah.
The sun, and then we have a lot of non-shadow casting lights within the different buildings, different spotlights and point lights. With very limited distance that gradually kind of fade out as you go far away.
I suppose that can be adjusted as well based on machine specs, so you can pull in the lights a little bit if it's a little heavy. I do have one more treat here for the viewers though. This didn't come up during the normal interview, but after the fact they shared some footage of War Era, which is what Kingmakers was called early in development. And in this footage, as you can see, the game was presented from a first-person perspective rather than third. But even still, you can kind of see the ideas that they had in mind and where they wanted to go here. Especially in this section where you leave the forest and suddenly you realize you're in an ancient battle. I'll let some of the footage play for a little bit here so you can appreciate this very early, ultra pre-release concept footage of the game before it became Kingmakers. What I found interesting about this footage is how you can see while the ideas exist, the actual interaction between the player and armies feels very small scale compared to where they go with Kingmakers itself. You're basically limited to just picking off random troops with your modern weapons.
Right, sorry.
Okay guys, this all sounds really awesome. Like I really appreciate you guys reaching out to share this early because it was not something I had on my radar, but it looks like a heck of a lot of fun. So I'm eager to check it out when it finally hits, and I guess you guys will be sharing more about that soon enough. But in the meantime, where can everybody go to check out more info on the game?
Probably the Steam page.
Yeah, the Steam page has a trailer. It has, descriptions of the game. It has some GIFs.
Yeah, we're going to be active in the community hub discussion forum. And, my phone number is all over Road Redemption. And it's my actual cell phone number. So, I know we can just call that.
Yeah, so we're probably going to include something like that in this game as well
awesome.
when you die. Phone number, because it's really great to get feedback from so many people about the game, and you can decide to change things based on it.
Yeah, I gotta.
Might be something like the bat phone though in the office.
Yeah,
Constantly ringing.
I get a call or text pretty much every day. And I have for the last 5 years.
All right, guys. Well, anyway, that's enough for me for now. So thank you for everyone. Thank firstly to you guys for joining me here today, and of course, thank you to everybody watching. And we'll see you next time.